Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and today on the show, two excellent writers, contributors to the Body Shocks anthology, out now from Tachyon Publications. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but we'll find out. We are in a place of horror today, as you can see. The, let the camera linger on the various props that the set designers put out here. Body parts, of course, some skeletons and such. Weird heads in sort of small little cabinet box, and very strange creatures or I don't know what this is. These are very slimy creatures, maybe Lovecraftian. I don't know. And there's also a TV in the corner there on the screen, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that has a loop of a short film by David Cronenberg. Now, David Cronenberg is not on the show. His dog may be
Oh,
on the show. Dr. Axolotl, hold on before I introduce you. I know you're very frustrated about the fact that Mr. Cronenberg couldn't make it. Anyways, let me introduce here today the authors on the stage are Kaaron Warren and Cody Goodfellow, also known as Dr. Axolotl, at least in Second Life. Hello, Karen. Hello, Cody.
Hello, Drax, and hi, Cody, and hello, everybody,
Guten Tag,
and
Drax.
non-bodies as well. So I didn't mean to exclude people who don't have bodies. Hello to everybody and every non-body as well.
See, this is
Hello, all entities.
this is
Yeah.
this is the way to introduce people in a virtual world. And Mr. Zuckerberg with his new Meta company really needs to learn this. Thank you, Karen. You're taking the lead on this, not discriminating against people with no bodies. Now,
Thank you. Yes.
before we go into the meat of the matter, see what I did there? Body meat.
Ouch.
Yep.
I, I would like to ask you, because you do have amazing avatars. What what brought you to, when I first approached you and asked about the avatar? Let's start with you, Karen. Uh, what when I said everything is possible, and then everything kind of became possible, and look at your absolutely magnificent being here. Why did you choose this?
I absolutely adore myself. I just love myself so much. I don't know. I just knew I wanted to be a fashion mouse. It just popped into my head. I think possibly because I'm not really a very fashionable person. I'll be honest there, but I do love fashion, and a famous Australian designer had just recently died, I think, and maybe I wanted to I was thinking about her outfits and how fabulous she was. So I decided I wanted to be a fashion mouse. And yeah, have a look at me. I think I'm wonderful. I love
I
the
don't know. Is
silver. I
this is
love the
this like a
design.
this is a total silver dress, right? Like this is some sort of
Well,
silver
it's a
suit or
pants
something.
set. It's even better. It's like it's pants, but it's got this whole dress bit at the back of it. It's
Oh.
exactly the sort of thing I would wear to go to the shops to get the milk and bread.
Oh
So
my
she's
God.
actually dressing down a little bit for this event.
She's
I am
totally
a little bit.
exactly. She's totally dressing down. Oh my God. I go to the opera in flip-flops. I mean, why? But
Well, I've been to the opera only once in my life, and it was in Fiji. And strangely enough, I wore a Carla Zampatti dress to it, which is fabulous. I found it at, they have amazing secondhand clothing shops in Fiji. So I found a Carla Zampatti dress for $5, and I wore it to the Fiji opera. So there we go.
That's
wow.
fantastic. You know, what you
Now,
remind me of, apropos of nothing, you remind me of the one time that I saw the Queen of England. I,
No.
I was,
what?
I
Let's
was,
not
yeah,
talk about this body shock thing.
What?
Let's talk about that. Okay, what?
Yeah, no, I went. I was visit. I was studying literature at the University of London in '92, and we did a visit to Hampton Court Palace, and it was a rainy day, and our tour guide was doing the whole thing, and he goes, "And if you look through the window, you'll see the Queen of England." And we looked through the window, and sure enough, she was sitting there in this dreary downpour underneath a canopy, watching these children in mouse costumes and powdered wigs and like 18th century finery doing a tea
Oh my
dance.
gosh. That's
And
hilarious.
but it was, yeah, no, but you're kind of reminding me of them, the
Isn't that
secret rulers
funny?
of the empire.
Oh, I love it. But she was not
Karen, you're
wearing
the
this
queen
outfit,
of
though. I
Second
don't.
Life.
I would have
I
loved
mean,
if the queen was wearing a rat outfit. That would
oh my gosh.
have.
I
She
think I
has
would love to see the. Well, she's got access to all the designers in the world. I think she should
right,
be getting an outfit like mine.
and she's wearing a mouse costume. She's imitating
Yep,
you. She's biting your style, Karen.
that's right. She can borrow it.
Okay,
Let me
good.
let me
There's
briefly
plenty to go
say
around. Yeah.
for the folks on the listening on their receivers on their little radios at home that we are using Second Life voice today instead of our other voice channel, so we might break up here and there. So please bear with us if you can't hear us. The YouTube folks and the Twitter folks, just let us know, and then we'll repeat. But now, Dr. Axolotl, aka Cody
Hi.
Goodfellow,
Hi.
how about you? What is up with this axolotl? Because an
Well,
axolotl is is some sort of animal, I
yeah.
guess.
There-
But you chose to be a humanoid axolotl. Why?
Well, the axolotl's fascinating to me because it's just such a paradoxical creature. It's a salamander, essentially unchanged for tens of millions of years, and yet they're neotenic, so they never lose their gills. So they're essentially kind of fetal throughout their lifespan, which I can relate to more than I probably should. And their native habitat is in Lake Chochimilco near Mexico City. So they're kind of shit out of luck habitat wise, and so they're most of the living axolotl population is in laboratories because if they lose a limb, they can grow it back. Um, and
Wow.
I do a radio show in Portland, Oregon, under the name called Freeform Portland. I do a show called Bionic Exotica, and I had created the Doctor Axolotl persona as a host thing so that irate listeners couldn't find me. And so far it's worked.
Oh, you mean like stalkers and stuff like that? People who are pissed off at what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, people who want me to play Misty for them before a murder. That.
Oh, I see. I see. Well, I mean, you should. Oh, wow. You should do this in Second Life. Well, we'll talk about this later.
Yeah,
Who?
we should.
Actually, Stranger says here. He says we should use when we introduce to all beings, great and small, seen and unseen, known and known. Um. Now,
Wow,
uh,
that sounds
with
like an
that,
invocation. I like it.
I like it.
so with the introductions out of the way, let's get to the meat of the matter. Oh wait, I already did that joke. Sharing
You did.
my notes here. Now, what is body horror? Okay, so we're talking about body horror today, and not only because this body shocks thing, and we're also going to talk about you guys' books as well. But let's start with body shocks. And now, in the book Body Shocks, it says that this is not only body horror; it's actually extreme body horror. That's what it says in the book. Okay, so I want you guys to just briefly talk about how you define this. And Ellen Dutlow, I threw up a little slide here. Ellen Dutlow is the editor of this book, and she says in the preface, she says body horror might be the most disturbing type of horror because it deals with the body's integrity being by intentional mutilation, accidental infestations by parasites, invasion by alien forces, degeneration, transformation, grotesquerie, and pain. As Jack Halberstam, professor of gender studies at Columbia University, writes, body horror represents the body as a locus of fear, says Ellen Dutlow in the preface of Body Shocks. Now, this is way too cerebral and academic, uh,
Sure.
but take it where you will. I mean, Dr. Axolotl, since you have a doctor title, how do you define this, and how did you approach this or how do you approach it when you write body horror?
Well, I think body horror is. I mean, she's right in that it is universal because or at least for those of us who have bodies up to today, I hadn't really recognized my privilege or my curse, but because yeah, sometimes having a body is a curse. There's so much that you have no control over, and we are so at the will of our organic rhythms and impulses and needs and instincts, which can sometimes be antithetical to our conscious desires or drives or needs or expectations of society. and furthermore, there's the denial and refusal of the body. I think body horror is uniquely resonant for audiences who have a puritanical understanding of, or a adversarial relationship to the organic or the animalistic side of our nature, and the horror multiplies wherever it's denied. And body horror can involve disease and decay and mutation, but it can also involve just the horror of our natural state, of our need to reproduce, of our sometimes drives for things that are destructive to us. And so I always look at it in that stance, and that's where it's most intimate. I mean, I generally don't write about what frightens me. I write about what fascinates me, and I trust that it will horrify other people. Just yesterday, I'm staying with my sister, and they have chickens, and she had a chicken that had an evulsed egg vent, and she had to she had to don rubber gloves, and she's trying to push this thing back into the chicken's cloaca, and the chicken's laying there quite sedately, and the rest of the family just looks stricken and ill, and they're like, I gotta leave. I can't help. So of course, when I see people running from something, I run towards it, and I went in there, and it was heartbreaking, because this poor bird, through no fault of its own, has had its insides come outside. But it was equally horrifying and frustrating for my sister, who's trying to push this thing back in and just hoping it'll stay there. And body horror at its best reminds us that we are, not only animals but also machines, and that these machines are subject to breakdowns and changes, and they run on fuels that we can't always face head on.
This is so interesting that you mentioned the lack of control, and because I'm working on a documentary about how people use virtual worlds and games during the pandemic, where you choose your embodiment, and your
Mm-hmm.
embodiment, obviously here that we have here in Second Life, we were not subject to the machine breaking down. I mean, unless the internet doesn't work, but
Mm-hmm.
that creates for some people a horror scenario where we don't care about our bodies anymore. I mean, a
Yes.
lot of people that are interviewed, they would say, "Oh my God, this is the total dystopian view of us." And I want to talk to you later about that, because I also know that you're a Philip K. Dick fan, and in the preparation we talked about sort of his um, sort of
Yes.
ideas also about sort of going into your mind versus the body. But
Mm-hmm.
Karen first. Now, Karen,
Yes.
how do you define body horror? And you're also, and a related question. I mean, why are women always in the body horror genre? Always. I don't even know. Question.
I
Karen?
think it is just women. I think all of us, to me, the basis of body horror is what pretty much drives almost everything we do, and it's about survival. So we fear the things that can kill us, which is exactly what we should be fearing. So we should be fearing bodily fluids. They're okay. Blood is okay in the body, but once you've got an open wound and it leaves the body, that is definitely something that we should be disturbed by and fear. And human waste is, like we shouldn't be going near the waste products that come out of our bodies, of all kinds, because they're not good for us once they're out of our bodies. So I think that's kind of at the heart of the fear of body horror. Because we should be disturbed by things that mean the body isn't working right, that the body's cut open, that sort of thing. Which means it's very good fodder for horror writers, but also crime writers, and also anybody who's ever written a story. I think uses elements of it, because it's even death is a version of body horror. Even the gentlest death is horrifying in some ways. So yeah, I think it sort of draws all that. For me personally, as a woman, obviously there are issues with control, as Cody was talking about, controls of our bodies and the things that happen to our bodies without our consent or without our control whatsoever. How very quickly our lives can be changed by certain events, I suppose. And having had children myself, I know the full horror of body fluids, as any parent does, unless you have had. Anyway, I won't go into detail because it's too
That's
horrific.
when you become responsible for another body as a parent. Then it's actually almost like every day is body horror, if you will.
Oh,
I
it
mean, at
really
least
is.
you can imagine it better.
It's
Yeah.
living with
Well,
your heart outside of your body.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
it is sad, but it's also when you're carrying a child and he vomits down your back and you literally get a burn on your back from the hot vomit. I'm also talking about that kind of base level stuff.
No, please. Let's talk about vomit. Let's talk about how my son vomited on my favorite book that I gave him while he was. Look at that! I'm reading a. I mean, anything goes. We're talking about body horror.
Yes. So I think it's that sort of stuff as well. Like you become a little bit immune to it. You do get used to it as well. Like I think the human body we're designed to become used to almost anything, circumstances, and anything like that whatsoever. But it's fun to play with. It's fun to be like disgust is an element of it. We are disgusted, like your chicken with its bum hanging out, Cody.
Right.
Kind of disgusting.
But it was also kind of wondrous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
To see, I mean, if you've ever been to like a Body Worlds exhibit, to actually see why the nerves really are just wires.
Yep.
You know, the muscles really are just strings and pulleys. And
Oh my God, I forgot the name of the guy. This is a German artist who is very controversial, and my dad wanted to go with me to one of his exhibits. He exhibits these bodies. He gets
Yeah.
permission from dead bodies. I gotta look him up. If people know in the audience who I'm talking about, please let us know. You know what I'm talking about? He puts these bodies in different positions and exhibits them in a room. There
Wow.
was one controversy where it was alleged that he was basically
using
buying.
Gunter von Hagen.
Yeah, that's right. And Körperwelt, exactly. Arden is saying Günther
I
von
think he
Hagen.
set up. I think he has some studios set up in China, and there was a question about whether
Exactly. Like he was
people
like
from labor
people who were
camps.
labor
Oh,
camps or
wow.
torture victims and stuff. Yeah.
There was a fascinating film that was a neat twist on the slasher genre called Anatomy, as well, in which kind of like a House of Wax thing, where medical students are being cut off one by one and turned into these elaborate, gorgeous exhibits.
Oh, I think I heard about that.
Yes, I
Jerry.
think that's part of it
Yeah,
too.
go ahead.
That, disconnect the body and somebody else having total disrespect for somebody else's body.
Right.
You do try to look after your own body, but also about other people's too. So someone who has total disrespect or total disregard for what is actually you, that's an element of horror as well. And I think that's a lot of what's explored in the body shocks stuff.
Right.
Now,
Right.
I don't actually think I know the description
one
talks about
second,
extreme horror.
Karen. No, go ahead in just a sec, but I want to ask people if you can hear Karen. Okay, she's breaking up a little bit for me. Let us know if you can still understand her, and if not, then we'll just have you relog. But Karen, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Um, I don't think that it has to be extreme to be horrifying. It can be very subtle. It can be a very subtle horror as well. So when they say extreme horror, like it doesn't have to be the full-on torture porn type thing at all to be horrifying. I don't think. Sometimes it's the subtle stuff which is more horrifying in some ways.
I agree.
Cody, before you come in here, and Casey in the chat says yes, and Lee says Karen is breaking up. Stranger says like how we react to the Nazis using human body parts to make products. Actually, I have a question in regards to that. I just threw up a slide with images from different David Cronenberg movies, and I want to ask you guys how the sort of the dominant Cronenberg and others, but to me Cronenberg is such a master of the visual medium of this genre. If you as a writer um, get influenced, or if it annoys you that he sort of has dominated the genre. I guess the question is, as a writer in the words business, where you have to come up with something on the page that people envision. When you look at somebody like Cronenberg, and the slide here has bills from Naked Lunch, Scanners, The Brood, which is one of my favorite films,
Oh, good Lord,
Existence,
yes. Yeah.
the brood, the children of these negative emotions come out and actually become uh, people themselves, little babies. Now, Bergen asked about David Lynch. So David Lynch, same thing. Basically, the question, the dominance of the visual medium in our culture, anyways. How does that impact you when you come up with stuff? Cody, maybe you take that first.
Sure. I think with as Karen pointed out, it doesn't have to be extreme to be effective to really horrify the reader. And in fact, I think a lot of what calls itself extreme horror fiction goes so far into it that I when you hear somebody reading a really extreme, gross kind of horror story, sometimes you experience this phenomenon where the prose just suddenly disengages from the visceral connect and it just becomes a word salad. And I think when you're doing something visually, when you're doing something like a cinematic thing or something in comics, it need not have a logical or conceptual underpinning. It can speak directly to the hindbrain. But when literature, in the kind of body horror literature that really works for me, it's the very idea itself has to be in some way transgressive, has to break a barrier, hopefully a barrier that you didn't recognize that you had, that you always just kind of thought water is wet, things fall when you drop them, kind of a rule, and that breaks that. And that's to me is a better kind of extremity than just making every word squish and making blood and pus squirt out of everything. um I
Well,
in
wait a minute, Cody. Are
yeah.
you saying that visual people have it easier? They can. I
Oh
hear you
no.
say. Maybe
Oh
I'm reading
no.
into the subtext. I'm reading like, okay, they just have to kind of. All they need to
Oh
do is
no.
instruct people
There's no
constantly. Like the story is
Oh, there's no just
secondary.
about it. There's no just about it. They have to push barriers of their own. I'm just saying it doesn't have to. And this is not to say that a prose story has to have a coherent logic, but in some way the idea it should plant a seed of an idea that really sticks in your head. The idea that eating human flesh is forbidden precisely because of the gifts that it could bring you. The things that we're told to avoid are anathema precisely because they don't want us to walk through that door and discover something or learn something or become something. And that's an inherent idea that can run away with you. With cinema, with a, or with art, if you can present a visual image, that visual image can stick in there and it need not have any other grounding. But I think with prose,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
you have different techniques and different ways of doing it, but it's going to be a different kind of hook.
Arden Schwa a lot of people talking here
Yeah, I think
about
that's right. I mean,
Roald Dahl and
Hmm.
David Lynch, and Arden says Roald Dahl has a short story about the addictiveness of eating yourself. Once you
Oh
start, you
gosh.
can't stop anymore. Wow.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Unearth that because I have not heard of this story. Find a
Or
link for it.
Survivor Type by Stephen King is another
yeah,
Ah,
one that
it's
uh,
good.
perhaps the most effective short film I've ever seen was a Dollar Baby short adaptation of um, of Survivor Type, in which I made an attempt to stand up and leave the theater to go get fresh air, and I fell on my neighbor because
oh my God, they thought you
I was like,
fainted.
yes, and the story, and it found a visual way of interpreting that story that put in details that weren't in the prose, and so it was different approaches to tell the same story, and I think that's as good an example as you could ask for, because in the story he doesn't, he has this guy writing a journal, and this guy's writing a
Hold
journal,
on,
and he's a
what's the
castaway
name
on
of
an
the
island.
story again? What's the name?
Survivor Type by Stephen King. It
Survivor Type.
originally appeared in Skeleton Crew, and it's one of his dollar babies. Where if you have a dollar, you can make an adaptation of it free and clear on your own.
I think I
And
have that in a German collection. Okay, go ahead.
it was it was what was horrifying about it was this guy's will to survive being subordinated or subverted by this self-destructive urge because there's nothing to eat on the island except his own flesh. And so how his determination to survive caused him to literally eat himself is a beautiful paradox where you turn the survival impulse in upon itself, and it becomes this recursive nightmare. That's what I think, where I think the the extremity comes from, because I don't think Ellen was going for like the squishiest, squirtiest stories, but the ones where the ideas themselves were the most extreme and corrosive.
Well, the word extreme was probably added by Tachyon. We got up
Oh,
the anti
for sure.
extreme, extreme.
For sure.
Karen, how about you and the visual and the influence that visual culture has on you as a writer? I mean, this is a general question I love to explore with other writers because I work in an audiovisual medium. We're inside a visual medium right now, but I love to exercise my imagination as a reader to, that's why I love reading so much because all these worlds come into my head and they're different from yours. But as a writer, I find it so interesting to explore how they deal with the supremacy, I guess, and maybe a little bit, consumers may also be, I don't know, jaded or expecting, stuff, and you kind of have to, maybe you feel compelled to up the ante a little bit. So anyway, Karen, how do you feel about this as a writer?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question. In the visual media, I think things are so immediate, obviously, and an image can go straight into your subconscious. I think it's writing and movies and any sort of media in any way you're trying to affect your viewer or your listener or your reader is to try and hit them in the subconscious, I think. And that's kind of what you were saying, Cody, that you want to have something that resonates and that carries on with them. So, for example, like in the back of our stage here, we've got this wrapped body hanging there upside down with the point, which is an amazing image. I could write that in a paragraph or two, and I've just described it in a few words, but it's not the same as the instant imagery of me looking at that. So I think that's the visual. Visually, it's so much easier to jump into the subconscious with something that's horrifying because it's instantly understandable, and we instantly see it. With words, you need to build the background there, which I think is really interesting. Someone mentioned The Fly earlier. I actually read the story of The Fly long before I was even writing, and long before I saw the movie of it. But it had an incredible effect on me. Just the horror of it and the description of it. I've never forgotten. But yeah, visually, I'm trying to think of what early movies and things I saw that would have affected me. I don't know. I can't quite remember, but it's a different thing. It's the instant jump into the subconscious that you can get when you're looking at something, as opposed to when you're reading something. It's a bit of a slower burn, I think, just because it takes time to set up the scenario.
People also mentioned here, of course, Kafka Metamorphosis. I reread it just recently, and it's terrifying. Here, The Fly. I just put this in. The Fly originally came out 1957 here by George Langelaan. I have never read it. I really need to read. I heard a radio drama on German public radio when I was a child. I think that was also really.
Oh, that would have
I
been
don't know
that would
why.
have been good to listen to.
Yeah.
My parents were not very good parents, I guess. No, they were.
I had somehow managed to get, when I was quite young, like probably 8 or 9, a collection of stories, Tales of Terror, I think it was, and it had so many good stories in there that I don't think my parents realised were quite as terrifying as they were. But it included The Fly, and I read and reread that book so many times. So I think I was affected more by reading than by watching, just partly because when I was growing up and the access I had to media and that sort of thing was less than my access to books. So I was definitely more affected by books than I was by the visual media.
I always envision some sort of crazy competition in the marketplace, in the attention economy, of sort of a spiral that is getting more and more extreme or demanding, faster and faster kicks. I think I'm pretty convinced that that's happening, but I'm not sure if there is a competition in the marketplace between writers and or publishing companies competing necessarily with, I don't know, game properties and movies. I don't know what the overlap is there. That would be interesting to bring someone on from the publishing world who might have some more numbers on that front or whatever. I mean, I just find it fascinating. Go ahead, Cody. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, if there's a publisher out there who feels like they're winning the war on video games, I'd love to hear their rationale. But because we got clobbered a long time ago, and in the grand scheme of things, I mean, no book or even a movie for that matter has ever made me feel half as scared as even the dumbest horror video game can. I mean, that combines, the terror of your own ineptitude leading to your doom, on top of just the immersion in it. And so what the kind of thrills that we're offering are a lot subtler. But like when I was growing up, my exposure came on all fronts. I remember staying up late at night and watching Phantasm on TV, and I got an issue of Cinefantastic back in 1980 that gave like a full profile with just excruciatingly delicious color photographs of all of the biggest gross outs in David Cronenberg's career, and I didn't find like prose that really matched that same kind of visceral terror until I came across like Michael Blumlein, um,
Ah, yeah.
whom whom I was not only an
But not
amazing
Stephen
like guiding
King. I
star.
mean,
I mean,
Stephen
well, no,
King.
Stephen King was fantastic. But here's a thing that I think if you're when a character when the people respond quite sanely, or naturally to the horrible thing, when whether they gasp and choke and freeze up or try to kill it or something, um, it's not half so disturbing as when the character doesn't respond to it as you expect. Either has a flat affect or actually finds it desirable, and that kind of detachment from what you would think of as a normal reaction to something horrifying was what really set Cronenberg's work apart, or J.G. Ballard's work apart, or Blumlein for that matter. Michael Blumlein was actually a physician, and a really heroic physician. He worked with like the most underprivileged people in need in San Francisco, and really loved and cared about people. He wasn't a weird robot, but he was able to write these stories that had a complete detachment from our natural fear, or sympathetic fear of blood, and that in itself was kind of scarier than whatever the mise en scène was for the particular story that you were reading. Was that failure to, or refusal to, gasp and choke and cover your mouth to keep from throwing up the way that the way that conventional characters would respond.
It,
And
this is
yeah.
interesting. Sorry to jump in here because I also want to
Hmm.
give Karen
Sure.
time to respond. I know that Cody is also from radio like me, or we are radio. We feel the air time. There's
Oh
no
God.
second. No. You're good. You're good, Cody.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Nothing sucks
Uh,
like air in a conversation.
um, this is interesting what you say about the video games that had this
Hmm.
impact on you, and this is something actually that really worries me, that the subtler scares and the I don't know, the presentational format of a book, we broadly lose appreciation for that in culture. And this is interesting because sometimes people look weird at me, go like, dude, you are like a evangelist of virtual worlds, and you're worried about um people not reading books anymore. And I said, well, this is very different from a video game. We're not providing a this is not manufactured to provide constant chills like a roller coaster. And I'm not
Yeah.
trying to dunk on video games here, but
No.
this is a medium where we actually use our imagination, I would argue, much more than sort of a packaged sort of thrill ride video game. And that, although it's visual, that's along the lines of what I feel a book promises. But um, Karen, I want to ask you where you feel the line is, and I'm bringing up a quote from the story about from Simon Bestwick. And Simon couldn't come today; he was scheduled, but he has apparently a day job, which is so weird because I thought you writers have so much cash. The cash flow is so incredible that
Oh,
that
if only.
why do you need a day job? I mean, it's just really strange. Um, but but Simon wrote a story in the Body Shocks anthology called "Welcome to Mengele." Really enjoyed this story, but
Hmm.
it's Mengele. I mean, Dr. Mengele was the famous Nazi doctor who, well, did experiments with humans. And the interesting thing is that people may not know a lot of the stuff that he found out by experimenting with prisoners and killing them. I mean, doing incredible inhumane experiments with them. Some of his findings were in fact influential in German medicine and were taught not because they came from him, but his findings. Of course, he's like, hey, I don't have to experiment with mice. I can do this with humans. So his findings were, frankly, uh, more usable for humans, and they were still used in the curriculum in when you study medicine in Germany up until very recently. So, anyways, I'm going to read this quick quote. On the screen, there was a naked corpse, female, far gone in decay, face down. Behind it, a chubby, balding man, middle aged, gripped its hips and buggered it. There was something horribly familiar about both figures, and it took me a moment to register what it was. When I did, oh Jesus, even through my nausea, I had to admit that the surgeons had done a great job. Even the corpse was a dead ringer for the original. In the other room, the Osmonds were getting up to antics in a farmyard that I have otherwise thought medically impossible. Welcome to Mengele. Now, that's pretty extreme. Um,
Stop! You're turning me on.
See, I knew there was something strange about Mr. Goodfellow, but the thing is, you know, I mean, we know that horror can be cathartic and it goes dark. But Karen, do you see a line anywhere? I'm just thinking of me as like a boy who was really into horror, and my parents were horrified. There was a German movie called Necromantic. You can guess what it's
Oh
about.
my God!
Oh yeah.
You can
You're
Google
you're
it.
right. Yeah.
Jörg Buttgereit. It's a fantastic movie.
Yes. Yes, it is. It really is.
But but is there a line, Karen? Do we have to censorship? Yes? No?
Well, look, I think everyone has their own line. My line is not using stuff, using the easy stuff like Nazi experiments in order to shock. I guess you need to have a lot more layers of analysis and understanding, and taking it from a different angle. So, same with killing children and killing animals in your stories. There's such easy ways to shock. So that's my line, is that there probably isn't really a line, although there's certain things that I probably wouldn't do because I don't want to just utilize them for my own writing, I guess. But I think there needs to be a point to all of it. So if there's some kind of analysis and some kind of further thought about it, then I don't believe that there should be censorship of it. But then yeah, I hate the easy shock. I hate the killing the dog just to create a sense of disgust or whatever. I hate the killing off the girlfriend in the first scene so that somebody's got motivation to get through the story. So that's the line that I have. And taking advantage of, I don't like to necessarily take advantage of past history like that one in particular, as there's a lot of history there. So it's a kind of a very easy way into the shock.
I think I mean, Simon is not here to defend himself, and I didn't want to put him on the spot. Thought like, oh my, this is too much because it's dealing with Nazi criminals. But I found this story to be really good. I mean, it's a great idea, and he's using Mengele there. But I was thinking also thinking along the lines of our current culture, and I asked this last time our previous guest about a trigger warning of sorts. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's a question there. I think you answered this really well, and I agree with Karen that an easy shock is always the easy way out. And art needs to be free. I feel, unless you're
I think it does. It needs to be
because
free. Yes, no, that's right. It needs to be free, but it also needs to have thought behind it. There needs to be some kind of a point, even if it's only a very small point. But I think
you
there
would
needs to
say
be
away with the trauma, like in a historical terms, let's say something that could traumatize populations, possibly. I was thinking like, if I write something like this that has that has impacted real people that are alive, I'm not sure if I could use this for shock value. I guess that's like a broad
Well,
approach to this.
if I mean, I guess it begs the question of whether you're. I mean, as Karen pointed out, do you have something to say about it? I'm sure um, Simon was using Mengele as an archetype, like a Dracula of our times, in order to make a point. Lucius Shepard did something similar with Mengele, and it was the name turning up is shocking, but also but we have there's a lot to unpack there, because not only, I mean, the Nazi scientists, um, so horrifying and troubling is that, as you pointed out, Drax, they took the natural will to understand just so far beyond our so far beyond our ethical borders,
Yep. Yep.
And gained us knowledge. So then, yeah, what do we then have to disavow that knowledge in its own
Exactly,
way?
because the moral dilemma, they created this moral dilemma that we're still grappling with. At least the German government does. Like,
Yeah.
what are we going to do if we strip the medical, education of all this knowledge? That we have to kind of redo all this stuff.
Right, and then at the same time, I mean, we use Nazi scientists to get to the moon, but at the same time, were those were all those scientists willingly complicit experimenters on human beings? A lot of them had guns to their heads as well, and that's its own horrific situation. As if you were a scientist or a physician and had taken, the Hippocratic oath and took it seriously, and we're then in an administration, that is telling you, your country and your nation and your own livelihood and the survival of your family depends upon you committing monstrous acts. Um, that's a kind of horror too. For me, the to bring it back to that question of what's the line of what's unacceptable. Yeah, I will stop short of writing something. I've never thrown out an idea if it fascinates me. I feel like it's my responsibility, if I have one at all, to pursue the very fact that I'm obsessed with something. And so I'm not going to write about something that I'm not obsessed with, uh, just to upset somebody else. There has to be some kernel of fascination. And I have to trust that what I'm saying is going to be important enough to say it, and if not, for somebody else to read it. Um, to me, the line is more, it's more defined, or more shows through when it's simply exploiting characters. I started to feel guilty about making up shoddy characters and then just feeding them into a wood chipper, or making up bad people and punishing them for sins I couldn't punish people for in the real
What they
world.
do in Friday the 13th franchise every day, and
Right.
Hostel. What's the other one?
Well,
Yeah.
well, and you notice it. I mean, you notice it in films. It really was driven home to me in watching a film called Sleepwalkers, which was a Stephen King ish thing that Mick Garris did. But in it, it had reached like this nadir where the monsters could literally pull the limbs off of people, and like the characters wouldn't respond with like definite agony so much as looking down at the squirting stump and realizing, I've been lied to this whole time. I don't have a skeleton. I'm just lunch meat in a bag in a costume. And at any point, people can pull my limbs off because I'm just here to be tortured. I'm not really a human being with a life before this, or any hope of a life after this. And that I get upset at, because then I feel like not only is my time being wasted, but you're wasting spaces where good art could be conceived. Because if body horror doesn't tell us something about what it is to be human, doesn't tell us at its kernel some core truth about the human condition. And I think if you are doing that, then no subject matter can really be truly prima facie off the table. But if you're not, if your human beings don't have bones, if they don't have lives worth fighting for, if they're just meat in a grinder, that's what upsets me and makes me feel like you should shut the hell up and go back to the cafeteria.
I agree. There's so
But
many
all of
good
it, and it's all
comments here.
reality too. Like
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead,
it's
Karen.
all reality. This is the stuff that is actually happening in this world. That has happened and is happening in this
True.
world. We
True.
can't even invent those things that are happening. Any day in the news, we're only seeing the surface of horrendous stuff that's happening here. Um, so yeah, I think we need to be as horror writers, we need to be honest about the stuff we're writing about as well.
Hell
Recently
yes.
wrote a story about, like, in Australia here we have some isolated communities of Indigenous people who've lived there for thousands of years, and one of our prime ministers called their choice, called them living in these communities that they've lived in for thousands of years a lifestyle choice, a lifestyle
Yeah.
choice.
Right.
Which is
right.
horrendous, and these they don't get health care. Just there's so much awful stuff that goes on. The government wanted to control them, but without actually helping them. So this made me so angry and so upset. Nothing I could do at a personal level, but I could write a story about an awful person who goes into one of these communities and something terrible happens to her. So that was quite satisfying. But I certainly couldn't write that story from the inside point of view, like I had to write it from an outsider point of view. So this stuff is happening every day, and this is just absolutely the tip of the iceberg of how awful this world can be, but not here in the Second Life Book Club. It's all nice in here.
Thank God
so
we've
I
all
think that
shed
we-
our bodies.
Yeah.
We have
Well,
our chosen embodiment. Uh, Karen, I want you actually to read a little bit, and so that shuts up Cody a little bit, so we get a little bit more balance here with the speakers. And
You're so
if
lucky I don't know where the mute button is.
if I may ask you to get up and carefully step in front of the book display, and the book display will then magically move in front of you, so you don't have to be
Oops.
perfectly aligned. And
Okay. Sorry
as
about
Karen
my.
is attempting to walk down, I want to read a couple of comments here because this was interesting. Somebody earlier was talking. Oh, Shiloh was talking about, reminds me of horror teachings your parents would tell you when we are kids that if we eat seeds, we become a plant. Now, Karen is
Yes.
now on the table. Just jump off that
Oops.
table and
Sorry. I thought I
go
was tall
forward.
for a little bit. There you go. I'm
There
off.
you go. Bingo. That's
Okay.
awesome.
Oops.
Stand right there, and the book display will magically move in front of you.
Thank goodness. I got it from behind. I love this outfit.
The outfit is absolutely. We have several great Second Life photographers in the audience. Please do take a lot of photos. This is just amazing. This avatar, and I'll mention it later, was made by Bespoke Caravan. They're just making absolutely amazing avatars. Ellen Datlow the next week. I'm sorry, Cody, you look great too, but let's talk about the women for now. Uh, Next week, Ellen also has an custom-made avatar. Now, people are telling me that that your voice is a little spotty. So, but we'll try the reading. This is that you're reading from your short story, which is about quite a dysfunctional family, I guess.
Yes. Yes. I'm putting my little microphone closer to my
No,
face at
this
the
is an
moment, so hopefully
internet. This
that's
is a
better.
bandwidth issue. This is a
Okay. All
bandwidth
right.
issue from your internet. We can't do anything about it.
Hopefully it'll be okay. Yeah, so this is a story called A Positive. And it was in part inspired, and it's quite an old story. I wrote this in about 1996, so it was one of my first short stories that
Wow.
I had published. So it's a really old one that she's recollected here. And it's been made into a short film, which I think was a really good rendition of it. Um, but it was inspired by stories in the media at the time about more than one family who had a second child in order to act as a donor to their first child, who perhaps needed bone marrow or something like that. And I didn't have children at the time then, but I remember just feeling so torn by that. By yes, I could understand it, but I also thought how horrendous for that second child to understand what they were born for. So this was my
So they're basically, so this is based on stuff that you heard about
yes,
a child being brought into the family as a donor of spare parts.
yes,
Wow.
yes, deliberately. So it's and a blood. So the parents made the baby the way babies are made. Deliberately in order to have someone who could donate bone marrow to the first child who was sick. So there's a lot there about how you feel as a parent, how you want to keep your children safe. You want them to be as well as possible, but there's also this second child who's brought into the world for that reason, and hopefully goes on to have a life that is beyond that. But We shall see. But I wrote it at the time for actually an Ellen Gallo. I was hoping that she would buy it. She didn't buy it until now, which is quite a lovely turnaround of a story. She was publishing a anthology of revenge stories. So this is kind of my version of a revenge story. But I'm only going to read the first opening of it, so you don't actually get to see what the revenge is in the story. You'll have to read the book to find out what the revenge is. All right, well, I start reading. Are we ready to go?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, not long after my father killed my mother, I removed him to a special home. I'm taking you somewhere nice, Dad. They've got a big TV and lots of food. Why can't I stay with you? I thought of the shit in the seams of his trousers, the smell of him. He was so helpless, such a child. It's for the best. I carried his empty suitcase to the front door. Got my Agatha Christie books in there? Yep. And my photos and my postcards and my pyjamas? All there, Dad. I patted him. You'll love it. I'll visit often, I said. I couldn't wait to see him settled in his new home. The house was mine at last, and I didn't bother with a garage sale, didn't sort a thing. I called the Salvation Army and told them to take the lot. Everything. All my belongings were those of the man I used to be. They marched up and down the stairs with load after load, and they were friendly at first, making jokes. After a while, they were dead silent, and they worked quickly. They wouldn't look at me. They carried out boxes of clothes, books, ornaments, clocks and crockery, glasses, flags, beakers, needles, syringes, stainless steel bowls, drips, magazines, photos, papers they would burn or read. They carried out furniture. They carried out bedspreads, sheets, towels, toaster, fridge, TV, stereo. Shower curtain, I said, and they even took that. I went on inspection when they finished. They wouldn't come in. I brought out one last armful of things: toothbrushes, soap, a hula hoop, jewellery, a bucket still crusty with blood, a pair of shoes, and a teapot. I passed these over the threshold and waved my past goodbye. It was still there, though, in the walls, the carpet, the ceiling, the smell of the place. So I hired a wallpaper stripper and a carpet remover and a floor polisher, and I bought some paint, and that was a full month's work for my girlfriend and me. Then it was time to go see Dad. The pathetic little marks he'd scratched into me were gone, the memory of his light weight, too. He was always a small man, smaller than Mum, although that made no difference to their happiness. As I was growing up, people often said, "Were you an accident?" Because Mum and Dad were so old when they had me. I eventually gathered that accident meant unwanted, and truly did not want to know the answer. Thinking they were comforting me, my parents said, "No, you were the most planned baby ever," and told me why I was born. I realised then we were not a normal family, that not everyone shared blood with their father. You were planned for very carefully because your father got sick after a lifetime of being healthy. We just didn't know how to cope. We couldn't do the things we used to. He tired so easily. So you had me for company at home, I said. Not quite, Mum said. It was his blood that was the problem. He was old and tired, that's all. I would have given him all of mine, but we didn't match. I said, "But you do match." It was one of the rare times I impressed them. Sorry, I just skipped a little bit. I realised it. How could we live with that, with death? We couldn't. The doctor told us it was a shame we didn't have a child because it would probably have blood that wouldn't clump his. That was when the planning began. Dad wanted a transfusion whenever I was able to provide one, so I have never been strong. As soon as I felt rich with blood, I'd be drained again. It was all they asked of me, though. I had no chores, no cleaning, cooking, visiting, politeness for me. Just that look in Dad's eyes, that need, and the pain, and the life going out of me. Our special room was called the theatre. I thought that was normal. I went to the theatre, people said, until I realised there were two kinds. I no longer boasted about having one. People only laughed anyway. I always knew when it was going to happen. I'd be the centre of attention, have favourite meals. We'd go for a drive one month, shopping another. I could never enjoy these special days, though. I knew what was coming, and all day Dad would pinch and squeeze at me, wanting me pink and tender. I never had an imagination, so I had nowhere to go while the transfusion was taking place. I wished the ceiling was a storybook, all the cracks and lines making rabbits and bears, but all I ever saw were cracks and lines. I knew them very well. Dad liked to hum along to a bit of music in the background. I still hate anything classical. There was always that silence between the movements when I'd hear Dad's bad blood drip, drip into the bucket as mine was slowly entering his veins. It was perfect, that rhythm, and I imagined I could hear it over the crashing cymbals and roaring chords of Dad's favourite music.
And that's Kaaron Warren reading from A Positive from Body Shocks. What an amazing story. What a great reading, Kaaron. Thank you. This is really a fascinating story. And get a little bit the gist of what's going on here.
Thank you, thank
Uh,
you, thank you.
Really amazing. I was actually not aware. I mean, it's printed in the book that it was one of your earlier stories. That's so interesting. I wonder how that feels, if you still feel okay with with the craft. I mean, when people get better, I mean, I think it's an amazing story, but internally you might think like, should have written this a little differently. My prose is better. Is that something that you sometimes feel like, oh, why do they print this now? Why can't I
Yeah.
rewrite it?
Oh, look, I wouldn't rewrite it very much. I would maybe, and even in that reading, I had tweaked. I did cut some little bits out of it just to contain it in the 5 minutes. I would probably tweak it a little bit here and there, but mostly I'm still really pleased with it. I mean, it really did go through a lot of versions before it got to the point of being published. But yeah, but yes, it is interesting to look back on older stories. Certainly, my craft has changed, but then I like the passion that I had back then, and I like the creativity. I guess I still think I'm very creative, but I think
The youthful exuberance that is
yes,
exuding
that's right,
from the
that's right.
from the page.
Yes, yes, but I'm glad it's still. I'm glad it's still out there. Yeah, and the movie they did was really, really, really good. Actually, I was really pleased with it.
Is the movie available if you can locate it? Maybe there's a link and you can share a little bit later. That would
Yeah,
be
I'll try to
fantastic.
find it. They had it on Vimeo, yeah, Vimeo. So I don't know if you can search on Vimeo for it. It's called A Positive, and the company was called Wild Bear who produced it.
Somebody in
But
the
yeah, I think
chat maybe can get on that. And then Karen, if I can ask you to try to attempt to go back and sit on your chair. I'm sorry, I'm acting like a
oops,
teacher here as always.
that's
And
being told what to do.
you just need to right click the chair and sit down. Um, I brought up a slide here that co-producer Shyla, she was listening to an interview with you on Read Local, and this is an interesting thing. Um, I kind of asked earlier about sort of women in the horror space, but this quote maybe goes towards women generally speaking in the writing world. This quote from you from this conversation is, all of us are confined by our birth and by what society wants from us and expectations. Even if we are in very happy places, we are still expected to behave in certain ways. And the way women, I guess in particular, are expected to behave, and the things women have been expected to do and are still expected to do. So you talk about the role of women in society, but how does that apply to you as a writer? I mean, take it where you will. I mean, this is an interplay that has a context. You can't extract one from the other, I suppose.
No, no. Look, as a writer, my writing identity is so very much tied up with my family member identity and my place in the community identity as well. Much as I would sometimes like to separate it out, they really are so connected. And I made a commitment, I guess, early on that I would be a proper family member as opposed to I'm a writer and my writing is the most important thing. So when the kids were young, I would often be, mid, and they weren't actually born when I was writing this story, but had written many since, obviously. But I would be right in the middle of a sentence or, a paragraph describing something horrendous happening or some awful, terrifying thing, and I'll have to go and pick the kids up from school and stand there at school pickup time and have conversations about muffins or carrot sticks or whatever that people talk about at school pickup time. So I always found that quite odd, that dichotomy of who I was as a person, I suppose. But yeah, I definitely do feel like all of us are constrained, I guess, to a certain extent about
But do you
who
mean
we're
this?
supposed to be.
This quote is this quote? I mean, we ripped it out of context because we pulled this quote. But is this a comment on the confinement of the childbearing part of the population that then is also very often assumed to be sort of the child rearing person, meaning it's a full-time job on top of every other job, and I know what I'm talking about because I was a stay-at-home husband. Hello.
Yes,
So
yes.
I had it really
Yeah, look
hard,
at
Karen. So please, I need some tears. But go ahead.
oh, it's a little bit about that, but it also just about as a woman who, I'm getting older now too, and there's certain expectations of how you behave when you're older and what you wear when you're older, and you're certainly not supposed to go out in a skin tight silver outfit, So
You can
yeah,
do
but
that,
then you
yes.
can't. It's hard unless you are completely cutting yourself off from society and living an alternative life. But even if you go and live somewhere that's very alternative, there are expectations there too of how you're supposed to behave. But I think that comment was, to a small extent, I really actually am not. I can't quite remember exactly where I was or what position I was in when I made that comment. But it is to a certain extent about being the child rearer and the one at home. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm not really answering that very well.
No.
But
I think
you
it's something
understand. I
to
mean, you
be.
know what it was like to have that dichotomy. That really, like the main thing was, I always knew I had to get dinner ready for the kids by about 5 o'clock. Otherwise, it'd be arsenic hour. We used to call it. You had to get everyone fed by a certain time. Otherwise, you were in for a hard time. My kids were wonderful kids, and they still are wonderful kids. But just being with kids,
No, I
is
think I mean
hard, and you have to make
absolutely. And
decisions about what you do with your day. And when I actually found some old diaries when I was cleaning out a cupboard of when they were tiny, like 3 years old, and 1 year old, or a tiny bit older, and just how very much it took up of my day was the play groups and the visits, and and my absolute commitment, which still remains to this day, to that, as opposed to wanting to live the entire life as a writer, which would be wonderful as well, but not something that I was willing to give up. I was not willing to give up the relationships that are so important to me in order to achieve that.
I think it's very important for folks to always reflect on that, what it means to have these kinds of responsibilities and pursue a career. I put one of the best tweet that I tweeted last week. I know this is not a competition, but I tweeted behind every successful artist is a person with good health insurance. But it
Yes.
could be the same behind every successful artist is also a person who takes care of the kids, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is kind
Yes.
of the same thing. So I think it's really important to just always reflect on that, what the person that is creating whatever they're creating, what other things are happening in their daily lives and constrains them.
No, that's right. But I'm just one of these. I'm incredibly lucky in my life. I have a partner who does work, and I work a couple of days a week. But he's always headed off to work and brought home the bacon and that sort of thing. So it gave me the freedom first to be a stay-at-home mum, as opposed to having to be an early working mum, but also to write. So I'm incredibly and lucky and privileged to be able to explore the way I do. So lucky. I think I would be a very frustrated and much crankier person if that wasn't happening.
Now, Cody Goodfellow actually did a film, A Stay-at-Home Dad, and it's in the local chat. And I'm going to throw it up on our little TV here in the corner. Stay-at-home dad. I see a disturbing shot here. I'm not going to mention it. It's hilarious. And also in the local chat, Ruby located your film here on IMDb. Now,
Oh,
Cody,
fantastic.
and we're if you're just tuning in here on the Second Life Book Club, our guest
We
today, Kaaron Warren,
apologize.
and we apologize. Of course, we do that. Our guests, Kaaron Warren and Cody Goodfellow, and if you're just tuning in, you're tuning in too late because we're officially out of time, but we can go overtime because we're not on NPR. Um, thank God. We can just roll the post game show into the main show, so we keep on streaming until the very end. So now I would like to ask Cody to come forward, and the book display will magically appear out of the ground as it did earlier. And then Cody will walk up to this book stand, and the book stand will then edge closer to Cody, um, as is the magic of Second Life. Now, Cody is going to read from his. Where's that book stand? Ah, here's that book stand. Please, book stand, magically
Right?
move towards Cody. Put yourself in front of Mr. Goodfellow. Cody is going to read from his story Atwater. And this is hilarious. This is about a guy who always gets lost in in a place called Atwater. And I, as a former resident of Los Angeles, I was only aware of Atwater Village.
Right.
That's not what you mean, but I don't know what. Anyways, I don't want to give too much away, but set it up as much as we need to for where you're reading it,
Okay.
because this guy gets lost and then he ends up in a really weird place. And let me just say one more thing. When I first got to LA, my first job was delivering books all over LA County. I had the Thomas Guide map. There was no internet back in the day. I had this huge map, and I was constantly getting lost off the wrong freeway. It was awesome. I was young, but it was also terrifying. And your story really caused me a little bit of PTSD because where this guy ends up uh, is pretty bad. But anyway, take it where you will. Whatever we need to set up, go ahead.
Okay. Wait, hold on 1 second. This is um I don't know why this is happening, but I know I deserve it.
Yes.
Um the teaser trailer is blasting on a loop in my
Oh,
ear. Um Wait, how does
oh,
that stop?
you can't turn that down. Oh, I'm
Oh wait,
sorry about that.
I think I did it. I think I did it. I got it stopped. Okay, that's good. Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question though? I was
Yeah,
having
you're
like a
totally you were completely destroyed by your own teaser day
it was a
trailer.
Rod Serling moment. Yeah.
That's
I'm
truly
sorry. Oh
body
yeah.
horror. No, I was asking
Yeah.
about the
Okay.
setup
For
of
Atwater. Okay,
Atwater.
Atwater.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Okay, so Atwater, yeah, came out of the most, I mean, the most seemingly mundane routes in that my girlfriend and I at the time got lost once trying to find the Los Angeles Zoo, and we ended up in Atwater Village, which is a weird
Ah,
kind of
yeah.
forgotten suburb, or not a suburb. It was just it's just this weird little enclosed, forgotten kind of bolus of exurb in the middle of the San Fernando Valley, and couldn't find our way out. And then not long after that, maybe a few months, we got lost in the Central Valley in California trying to get to Bass Lake. And
And it was also Atwater.
we found ourselves in a place called Atwater, and we realized
Oh my
Atwater
God.
is a place that's wherever you are when you're completely lost. When you are at that moment that you don't know, you have to admit that you don't know where you're not going to get where you were going, and you consult a map. Then you're in Atwater, and so that I gestated. I mean, that marinated for quite a long time before I found like an extended metaphor to take out of that experience. But what I was trying to speak to was that fear and anxiety when you are utterly lost, or when someone you care about is utterly lost and you're separated, and at a time when you most need all of your faculties to be refined so that you can reclaim the lost person or reclaim yourself. They seem to be at their least effective. Your body almost and your mind almost seem to work against you, and so Atwater becomes a place where everyone that you meet has somehow externalized their internal conflicts as physical, visceral phenomena.
Ah.
As these extended metaphors, and for their own dysfunctions, their own maladies, in trying to find his way out of that, it's confronting that sense of that outer border, or that inner border of where the organism meets the entity, the ghost inside the machine, and how they define each other. And so the excerpt that I'm going to be reading follows on. There's a main character. His game is given only as Howl, Howell. And he's a very efficient and effective, possibly flat effective on the spectrum person. But he finds himself lost on his way to a business meeting in Los Angeles. And he gets off at the wrong off ramp and finds himself in a deserted neighborhood, seemingly unrepaired after a long ago earthquake. And he lets a hitchhiker into his car, and that hitchhiker is very nervous and urgently urges him to get them out of there. Even as the pores on his face and his neck enlarge into these hexagonal tessellated patterns and start disgorging bees.
Oh,
And so our
I'm already
character is
creeped
now,
out. Yeah.
right before I even read it. I should have read that part because it's all downhill from
No,
there.
no, it's
But
good. No,
this,
no, no,
this
it is.
guy. So he, Howell abandons his own car, and he's also a slave at this moment to the other great driver of the human mechanism, his bladder. So we'll start from there. Almost nauseous now with relief, Howell unzipped and pissed in the dark. A sound, and then another behind him. His bladder slammed shut. His balls crawled up and wrapped around his femoral artery. His legs tingled and fell into a coma. Small sounds, but distinctive, and if not threatening, then in this place they portended a myriad of things, all awful. It was the sound of a metal tool striking a metal tray, and the sound of a miniature saw biting into something hard, and the reek of burning bone. Howell turned and sought something to hide behind as he saw how far from alone he suddenly was. A moth-battered ceiling fixture lit up a shining steel table in the center of the empty garage. Two gaunt figures in black smocks and leather aprons hovered over it. They wore cages over their heads like old-time insane asylum alienists, or their heads were cages, for they seemed to imprison nothing but shadows. Between them on the table lay a nude female body, painfully white, viciously thin, a naked sprawl of cruel angles and lunar planes, decoratively inked with dotted lines that encompassed the whole form. Freshly sutured cuts ran down the arms and legs, and perhaps the worst of it was that Howell saw nowhere a drop of blood. Deftly, one of the alienists sawed down the bridge of the dead woman's nose, while the other peeled and parted the skin away from the skull. Pardon me. Damn organism. Howell didn't know how long he watched. Their procedures were so methodical he got sucked into infinite minutiae, only to take a sudden stabbing breath when suddenly, with a magician's flair, the peeler laid bare the skull and held it up. The skull was black glass, toxic onyx ice, squealing and smoking as it met the hot, close air. The alienist dropped it into an oil drum, changed into a fresh pair of heavy rubber gloves, and opened the gilded doors of a medieval reliquary on a sideboard. The other alienist continued his master ventral incision at the jaw, laying open the fuligen rib cage, which spewed ribbons of oily vapor across the table. Working behind, the first alienist selected a skull of ancient yellow bone from the reliquary and deftly slipped it into the hollow face, arranging the features just so, then nipping the lips of the incision together with black thread as fast as a sweatshop matron. Cowering behind a Camaro, half propped up on cinder blocks in the mouth of the garage, Howell started to creep backwards to the gate. He'd face down the honeycomb man, or just run out onto the freeway. He'd get out of here when the woman on the table spoke. I felt that, she whimpered, and Howell was gored by the wonder in her voice, as much as by the fact that the speaker was a filleted cadaver with two headless surgeons, elbow deep inside her. He trembled, but it was thousands of misfired reflexes warring with each other as he tried to frame a reaction to this. An alienist set a new rib cage in place, then stitched it up as the other prepared to join his incision with the cleft of her groin. Howell rushed at the cutter, screaming, "Get off her!" with his fists pounding its broad back, and his mad rush tipped him so that he fell almost into it when the towering form collapsed on itself with no more resistance than an airborne shopping bag. He blundered into the edge of a table and knocked the wind out of his lungs as the alienist with the needle calmly reached for something on the tray that looked like a nail gun. On the table, the woman looked at him, her eyes, impossibly vast black pupils, ringed by violet irises like bone deep bruises, drank him in and stole something he needed to breathe. "Take me," she said. "Take me away." Howell's hand found the knife and lashed out across the table at the other alienist. The blade slashed the unresisting fabric. The black form deflated and melted into the oil-stained shadows. Howell dropped the knife and looked for something to cover her with, trying to say, I'll get you out." "What's your name here?" she asked. He took off his jacket and draped it over her, arms out, awkwardly trying to size her up to lift. Howell, Roger Howell. Listen, are you okay to move? I saw what they. She sat up on the table and leaned into him. The exquisitely fine stitching down the center of her face creaked when she smiled and put the knife to his throat. Her other hand hustled his crotch. "I am cured."
Wow. Cody Goodfellow reading from Atwater. Absolutely
Wow.
amazing. Big round of applause. We have just incredible readings today. Cody, you can sit back down again. I'm playing
Thanks,
first
everybody.
first grade teacher.
Amazing.
This is from the
Yeah.
Body Shocks anthology out now. Several people have IM'd me and said they got to get this book now. Um, Now I'm sitting on the book stand because I'm the noob trying to put the book stand into the ground. So I'm sitting on it. This was a Second Life moment. I hope somebody caught that. Anyway, this story is really cool, and thanks for the backstory because when I read it, I was like, okay, Atwater, and of course Atwater Village was, and
Right.
then I looked it up, and it's amazing. Like you said, there is an Atwater in the Central Valley, close to Merced, and
Yeah.
it's crazy that you had this personal experience. Yeah, you must have thought like, what's happening? There's another Atwater here. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, and I always, I mean, as an author, I mean, once that embeds in you as an instinctive reflex, you always, whenever an experience really transport you, you instinctively take a step back and observe it, and quantify it, and you're thinking, wow, this is fascinating. This is what it feels like to panic. This is what it feels like to know despair or to know loss. But it was I mean, what told me I had to write the story was that I was unable to get my head out of that space of that actual irrational fear that, yeah, next time you get lost, you'll find your was help in Atwater, and you'll be unable to find anything else.
that's when something that's interesting. We have only 10 minutes left, and I
Mm-hmm.
had two segments, and we're going to skip this back to school segment, which is fun. We'll do it next
Mm-hmm.
time, where people
Mm-hmm.
play students, and we're going back to writing school, and we can ask each other because I do want to present. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your books, where we're talking about this anthology, but you're also writing your own full books, and as I'm a compulsive book buyer,
Mm-hmm.
I have, of course, purchased. I had no time to prep these books because of this body shocks thing, but I did buy your latest, and I want to bring the magic here of Second Life again is that books fly. So I would like to start with Cody's book. So Cody's book, Un America, is flying in front of us a little bit. See, it's spooky.
Ooh.
So can we do this again? Come on,
It's
fly.
a ghost book.
It is a ghost book, yeah. And let's make the book really, really big, and show it to the audience. So this is Cody's latest. It's called Un America, and I'm gonna read the little blurb here in the back, and then Cody can riff on it a little bit. Now the
Mm-hmm.
blurb on the back is is awesome. It says buried half a mile beneath the desert sand of Mexico, there exists a secret city that holds the promise of everything that draws refugees and immigrants to America: liberty, luxury, and excess. In this terminal autonomous zone, two prophets will rise. One, a reckless seeker who believes the psychedelic mushrooms he's discovered will spur a revolution in human consciousness. The other, a fire and brimstone preacher endowed by strange power that heals the sick and raises the dead. And as rival factions emerge around them, a march toward war begins. Now, the book can now stop going around and maybe have it face up the audience so that we have it here. But Cody, this sounds incredibly enticing, this thing. And I'm going to wrap in another question about Philip K. Dick, because we learned that you're a big Philip K. Dick fan. Philip K. Dick
Oh yeah.
was, I'm not sure if he was, I'm not an expert, but he was a proponent, I guess, of expanding your mind via psychedelic drugs. I don't know if he always wrote with the help of them, but you mentioned, or the blurb here in the back mentions that as well, expanding your consciousness. Take it where you will. What is Un America about? But maybe more specifically, is Philip K. Dick possibly an inspiration for this one? And how about them drugs? Why do you need drugs as an enhancement to have enough imagine? Take it where you
Well,
will. Here you go.
okay. I think okay. That should be easy, super easy, barely an
3 minutes.
inconvenience. Yeah. Oh, I can do it in one. No, what I love about Philip K. Dick is that Philip K. Dick wasn't writing so much science fiction as cerebral horror. And if you're going to call what Cronenberg, or Blumline or J.G. Ballard, at their best did body horror, Dick wrote about the horrors of the mind coming up against its own lack of limits and its own lack of infinite ability to torment itself. And I was paying tribute to and kind of trying to pay back some of my some Dick influence with Un America, because it is very much the characters in it would be very much at home in a Philip K. Dick novel. There are um, they've been damaged by past experience, but instead of cynicism, they've embraced an even more toxic kind of idealism, and which is the kind of thing that keeps America that America runs on. It's kind of a furnace that burns these myths, and it's a place where the impossible almost happens every day. And I wanted to. The origin of it was I read once after we had a TV movie about a nuclear war, or TV miniseries about nuclear war in the 80s called The Day After, and around the
Oh,
same
I
time,
remember it well.
yeah, yeah, TV Guide talked about how the Soviet Union made a mini series about America, and it was called America, but with a K, and it was this nightmarish propaganda vision of what America was. And I'm like, oh, screw you! We don't need you for nightmarish propaganda visions of America. We can do that ourselves. And so I wrote about, I wanted to write about it, what an American concentration camp would look like, and it's a world where everything is free, but everything is experimental. And during the Los Angeles riots in 1992, when I was in college, my roommate and I would ride around on a scooter, or just cruise around in the streets, and we saw all these people coming out who were hiding generally or they worked in sweatshops, or they worked in some other kind of illegal enterprise, and they were clothed entirely in like Joe Camel merchandise, promotional stuff for Camel cigarettes, and they were participants in a whole other America. They came here because they heard it's this nightmarish casino where you could die or you could win. And the vision of that as this thing that actually has figured out a way to weaponize or harness as an energy source people's own irrational desires and beliefs about it was what I hope to do. And so it is kind of body horror on a grand scale. I mean, if you look at where the borders of body horror are, I think we may have reached a logical limit as far as individual body horror. But I think Mitt Romney, that great prophet of horrible times to come, ushered in the new age when he told us corporations are people, my friend. Because if corporations are people, then we aren't even amoeba. And if we're single-celled organisms, and the economy of scale has changed to where you have to be a multinational corporation to qualify as an organism recognizable on an international level, then that kind of changes the whole scale of things. And so I wanted to kind of write like a body horror novel about a nation, is what I guess that is.
I'm super excited about this. This is one of the, I complain on a very high level, as all white men do in our age. Cody, you know what I'm talking about. So my biggest problem right
Birthright.
now is, yeah, absolutely. My problem right now is that I have to prepare next week for Alan Datlow, who is fantastic, but I much rather want to read your book, but now I got to read this other book in prep for next week. But anyway, so that's my biggest
Mhm.
problem in life right now. Karen, now let's go to your book, which I ordered, which arrived today. Let the books fly, please. Let the Un-America book sink into the ground for now, and bring up the book Slights. Slides is the name of your book. I don't see a book flying. Why is the book not flying, Karen? Um, I hope the book will
Fly, it'll
fly.
fly.
There you go. The book is starting to fly. And please, book, become much bigger. There you go. Look how it's flying. Now, your book, I'm going to read the blurb in the back. When Stevie Searle almost dies in the accident that kills her mother, she does not see a shining path or a golden light. Instead, she sees everyone ever slighted, waiting to take a piece of her in a cold, dark room. The person whose place she took in the queue, the schoolmate she cheated off, the bus driver she didn't pay, all waiting, all wanting to take their revenge when she finally crosses over. Evie is fascinated by the dark room, so she sends herself there again and again and again. Also incredibly enticing and appetizing, this blurb, Karen. This is amazing. Tell us a little bit more about this book.
So this is a reprint of a book that was published about 10 years ago, but was really going out of print. So a local publisher decided to bring it out again, which I'm really, really happy about, to reach a broader audience this time than it did last time. So yeah, Stevie is a pretty strong voice still in my mind. I was recently asked, is there a character I've created who still speaks to me? And Stevie is definitely in there, because this is not quite a spoiler. It's kind of something that happens fairly early on, but she's a bit of a serial killer as well. And what she says to people, she's fascinated. She wants to know what other people see in the afterlife, and what they see as they approach death. So she says, "What do you see? What do you see?" So when this person asked me, what would Stevie say to you? I said, well, clearly she's about to cut my throat, and she's saying, "What do you see?" She's yeah, someone who actually does terrible things in her life, but is affected by the slights that she does as well. And I was in a little bit inspired by those moments that we do have, where you do get irritated in day-to-day life, and you do get slighted, and you do feel those moments of unhappiness. And maybe it was a little bit about me wondering how they affect us, and when they
Well,
mount
also
up
a little
into
bit of
one
the
big thing.
justice. I mean, when I read that blurb, I was thinking, like, this taps into what we feel when we get slighted, and we kind of sometimes irrationally feel there's got to be some universal justice at some point in life. I mean, we're gonna pay them back, or somebody will,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, yeah. That's right. Because it is, when someone pushes in front of, like, it's no big deal that someone pushes in front of you in a queue, but it's still annoying, and it still takes 5 seconds out of your life. Or, if someone's mean to you momentarily, you want to sort of get your own back, but you can't really, because it's just so minor. So yeah, that's all an element of it as well. So it follows her through from the age of 18 to the age of 35, and I'm not going to tell you how it ends. But I've been working on a screenplay for this one, actually. I've got, actually, the same people who made A Positive are really interested in turning this one into a movie. So I'm really re-examining the character herself and what she does, having to tone it down a little bit, I think, because it is quite a horrific novel in many ways, just with its suicidal ideation. I think is a really important thing that we need to think very hard about when we put it on the screen. We didn't even sort of talk about all that stuff in our
Oh yeah.
conversation, which has been so fascinating and so ongoing.
This
But
is
the
actually a
suicidal,
topic. I'm sorry. I'm always stepping. I'm a terrible host. I apologize, Karen. But I just want to
that's
throw this in
conversation.
there.
That's what's conversation.
when you come back, this is actually something good that you mentioned it. I need to take a note because there was a big controversy about the 13 Reasons Why, which was a great book made into a series by Netflix, and I kind of saw this. I don't think you needed to be a you know a psychologist to see this coming, that the visual depiction of suicide, 13 Reasons Why, is about teenage suicide, but if it's visually depicted in this glossy way that Netflix produced, the series actually increased suicides measurable. There was a huge article about that, but I
Wow.
digress. I mean, this is the difference between a book and the visual medium. I think
But
it.
Sorrows of Young Werther increased
I know.
suicides.
I knew that you were gonna
That's
say
why they
that.
call it the Werther effect. I mean,
The
shit.
young Werther. Okay, well, they didn't have Netflix back then, so of course,
Sure.
Goethe. The good doctor, is referencing Goethe. Can somebody please bring up the young Werther by
Is
Goethe?
is
Where
is there is there a rule where robots will all carry us off if we start quoting Goethe?
no, 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 no. This is a very legitimate point, actually, Cody,
Okay.
because you completely deflated my argument here, where I
Well,
would stipulate that the visualization of this issue is
mhm.
is can is glorifying by the nature of the medium, I guess is.
But here's the thing. I've talked to people who have suicidal ideations, and quite often they do glamorize. They do have a shining golden light around it. They make it feel like not just this is the only way out, do it, loser, but like this is the most heroic act you could commit. And yeah, it's dangerous to glamorize it, but I think it also, if it to anyone, any artist who's ever experienced it, you'd be selling it short to not show how enticing, how glorious it can seem to be. And so you have, yeah, I mean, we do have a responsibility to affirm life and not lead anybody off the path to death. But it's that's where things get difficult. Is how honestly can we depict, should we depict a thing that is genuinely dangerous? You know,
Karen,
I don't
you
know.
had two radio. No, this is make a very good point. I just realized again that Karen, we stepped on her. She was just
I'm
talking,
sorry,
and then
Karen.
two radio guys. It's terrible, Karen. We apologize. I apologize for
Watch
him.
out for brake lights over on I-15 there. I'm sorry.
Karen, you have the last word. This movie is being made, but you were just talking about toning it down because of why?
Yeah, well, not so much toning it down, but just being much more aware, as you say, of the visual depiction, making sure. I mean, I actually feel like the book. I've had emails from people literally all over the world saying that this book helped them in really hard moments, which I think is really good. Even though it's a very very dark novel and ends in a dark place, but there's something about it that somehow gives hope to people, and I found that I'm so pleased about that because I would hate to ever have the opposite. But I think in film you have to really think harder about the way you do depict things, and it's certainly never glamorous in any way whatsoever. And also the murders, like there's quite a few murders in there, and and the director and I have talked a lot about in my book. I can have them not quite random, but pointless, I suppose. Like she's not choosing people because they deserve to die; they're just kind of dying. They were just there. And we've talked a bit about how in film there needs to be a bit more. A film viewer needs more sense, I guess, than sometimes you can get away with in fiction.
Mm.
But yeah, it's fun to re-examine the book itself. I wrote it in a very short, like I think probably it took me 3 months, which is short for me.
Wow.
Really, it was just a downloading of this person who was in my head, and I really wanted to get her onto the page. I had lots of fun with her. She's pretty funny. Like I have people think that she's quite funny because she says what comes into her head, which is very tempting to a lot of us. We try and, as we were talking before about the constraints that society puts on you, and that's often about not saying the thing that comes into your head, whereas she will say that thing. So I had lots of fun playing with somebody who could just say whatever she wanted.
I will say
But yeah,
what's
she's
in
a
my
lonely.
head.
I actually explored like she's a very lonely person, and I quite affected by the fear of loneliness, like not being alone, but the fear of loneliness is something that really is kind of inside me, I think. And I really feel for people who are alone and who don't want to be alone. So there's a lot of that runs through this story as well, which is maybe what resonates with some people as well.
Well, I am very excited that I have these two books here ready to go. I need to wrap up the show brutally because we are completely out of time. Kaaron Warren, Cody Goodfellow, thank you so much for coming. Absolutely wonderful. A big round of applause, please, from the audience. I hope the audience had fun. I hope you guys had fun. I hope you're coming back and hit us with crazy ideas for panel discussion or some sort of maybe different time zones. So Kaaron, we really appreciate you are in a time zone there's some compatibility issues with our normal time zone, quote unquote normal. So we totally appreciate it. The links are in the local chat for Kaaron's website, Cody's website, the Body Shocks website, and absolutely amazing. I'm gonna run through my credits here real quick. First of all, Kaaron's avatar was made by Bespoke Caravan. These guys make custom avatars in Second Life, and they made this avatar, I believe, from scratch. And normally that costs a lot of money, but we are, of course, the Second Life Book Club. So we struck the deal that now Kaaron's avatar will be sold. You can buy her avatar. It's not her, but it's not the Kaaron avatar. It's called what is the avatar now called? Carla, I believe.
Carla, yeah,
Carla.
for the Australian designer Carla Zampatti, who inspired me.
Carla Zimpetti is now on the Bespoke Marketplace, and Shadow Blade says, "Shut up and take my money." There you go.
She's fabulous.
You can buy it right now. Um, the Second Life Book Club, let me check my credit slides here. Step through the credits. The Second Life Book Club is every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Pacific time. And the email is slbookclub@draxtor.com. I believe the show is produced by Kyla the Super Gecko, the Belcher Wren, myself, and the set here, the magnificent set, which will stay around this castle, all this stuff was put together by Ruby. She's the location manager and master builder. Amazing job, Ruby, and she also got us Dr. Axolotl's avatar. I should also mention that. Big thanks to Patch and Brett from Linden Lab, Theanine, AJ McDowell, Marianne McCann, Arden Schwartzman, all the moles over at Linden Lab. I was going to say about the set here. We have 3 islands as an archipelago. You have to walk over the bridge, teleport around. All the books on the table you can click. They will shoot Body Shock's website. Other books, Kaaron's book and Cody's book will be there. Respective websites. We have a lot of sponsors. Those are the folks who give us the stuff for free, and we would like you to go to their businesses and tell them the book club sent you and you want to buy Carla or whatever you want to buy. That's how it works. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Draxtor. And don't forget to tip the staff. There's the little dragon tip jar. Please the the tip jar, tip the dragon if you like this because our volunteer staff will appreciate it. We're not getting paid. This is a labor of love for the book people. Next week, Alan Datlow. Oh my God, I did Datlow, Datlow. Yes, so right.
Yes,
Maybe you know
yeah.
Datlow, Ellen Datlow, the queen of horror, the cracker of whips of authors as the editor, always calling them, cracking the whip to get those stories ready for publication, always hitting them over the head with a calendar, and she will come on as another magnificent virtual embodiment, also by Bespoke, and she's next week coming in, and we're talking about her. I think the 13th edition of the Best of Horror just came out. Best of Horror, yeah, it's 13 and that and Body Shocks.
Fantastic. Oh, I love that series so much. Oh my goodness.
It's a bad
Inspirational.
time for you, Karen, but maybe if you can't sleep, just come on in.
Yeah.
as Carla and hit her with some questions. Like, why are you calling me at 3 in the morning to finish my script? Yeah, that's how I envision the relationship between Ellen and you guys.
She's very gentle. She'd never call me at 3 in the morning.
At 3:30.
5 in the morning, yes.
Wait, she calls you?
Ah, see,
No,
Cody feels
no,
slighted. There's a
Calls me
slight.
thing.
no, she doesn't call me unless she's visiting me in Australia, and yes, we do call.
Okay.
And we're gonna wrap up the stream. Thank you guys, Kaaron.
Thank
and
you
Cody,
so
and
much. This has been
thank you.
absolutely fun. Thank you, fabulous audience, for all the questions and the comments. I was reading them as we were talking, and they were just so interesting and so inspirational. Thank you.
Yeah.
So good
no,
to see a diverse audience and a lot of new people, and people do read. So that's absolutely awesome.
Yay!
that's my favorite part of all this. But thanks, everybody.